On September 11th, 2001, the United States experienced the worst terrorist attack in its history. At 8:46, a hijacked airplane impacted the North Tower, and only 17 minutes later at 9:03, another one hit the South Tower. Both towers collapsed. At 9:40, a third hijacked flight crashed into the Pentagon. In the coming hours, a fourth plane was found, crashed in a Pennsylvania field. Its passengers, having fought off the hijackers but unable to land the plane, bravely sacrificed themselves by crashing into a Pennsylvania field in order to avoid further casualties. In the coming hours, it was discovered that Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, was behind the attacks. The following is an interview with my father, who witnessed the events on TV as it happened. Where were you during the time of the attacks?
So September 11th, we and your mom and I, we were on a surf trip, and we were driving in our camper van through the southern Oregon coast, and we had stopped at a gas station in Oregon, and the southern Oregon coast is very rural. And not a lot of cities, not a lot of people around. And I first learned about the 9/11 attack while I was getting fuel at a small gas station in Southern Oregon.
How did you feel in the moment?
At the very beginning, I felt, so I'm getting fuel, and everyone is standing around the gas station kind of like dazed and confused and startled, and like there was a vibe in the air that something terrible had happened. I was thinking maybe there was an earthquake because we had been through the Loma Prieta earthquake, so it had that sort of vibe to it. There was a stillness in the air. People weren't moving around, and then since we were on the road, and there's not a lot of radio stations up there, right? Because it's very rural, so you weren't connected.
Of course.
And then I'm getting fuel, and then I decide to go into the bar. There's a little cocktail bar right next to the gas station while I'm putting fuel in the van. Your mom is just in the van, and I go into the bar, and sure enough, like on the TV, they showed the World Trade Center towers, and a plane had crashed into the tower. And so my thing was, wow, it's a totally sunny day in New York City. That's really strange of all the years and all the air travel going on that it just happened just then.
Mm-hmm. Of course, to think that would have happened like then of all days.
Right, it just felt, wow, that's really bad accident that just happened. So, obviously everybody in the bar is watching the TV, everyone's like listening in. I go back to the car to finish filling up the car, and then people come out of the bar and like another plane had hit the other tower. Mm-hmm. And so I felt something was not right at that point. It wasn't just an accident, mm-hmm. that there was some malicious thing going on, but I didn't know what it was.
Right. And following up on that, who do you think was behind it? Of course, like after it got exposed as a terrorist attack. Just in the following hours and weeks.
Yeah, so the United States at that point in time is obviously been dealing with the Desert Storm, mm-hmm. Us going in there, looking for nuclear weapons with Saddam Hussein and all that, and that turned out to be like a disaster, blah, 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 blah. So my impression was it was probably, someone from the Middle East. Mm-hmm. It was something like that. Now, whether it was, out of Indonesia or something like that, but somehow, I think it did come out later, but like something was going on where two planes crashed into the World Trade Center in succession.
That's
I
not
think
just an
people
accident.
thought, hey, it could have been a hijack, but all hijacking scenarios before then were about getting money or something, right? Hey, we hijacked the plane, move $1 million into my checking account. This was clearly a suicide because everybody died. And then it suddenly came out too that there was the Pentagon and all that stuff. So there's other things, but I felt the one area that was definitely the Middle East, because we were, as Americans, we were not liked very much by the people in the Middle East.
And when it was eventually revealed that Al Qaeda was behind it and the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, how did you feel about that?
Well, I felt that was the right thing to do. I was really mad that they did that to Americans. To take any American's life is a bad thing, but I was proud that we were going in there and going to figure out who in the heck did this and go sort it out. And if it was really for an eye for an eye, I felt that something needed to be done. Because if we didn't do it, if we didn't stand up and defend ourselves and get to the bottom of who was responsible for that with consequences, then they would do it again.
It sets a precedent. And finally, what long-term impacts do you recognize in America today?
What long-term what?
Long-term impacts.
Well, I think that, fast forward to current events, is that there's still a lot of animosity to Western governments, not just the United States, but Western Europe, etc. I think a lot of these folks that have immigrated from these areas, maybe aggressively have been allowed to settle in the West, and might not necessarily represent the core values of the West. They haven't necessarily assimilated Western culture. They've kind of had their own culture and stayed with their own culture. When you don't take the time to assimilate, to learn your host country's language, their traditions, their norms, I think you've got a problem. I think the impact here is that there's been sort of a lot of pain between the West and the Middle East because of lots of issues there. And I think the United States needs to do an important job with leadership to, work with those other parties to try and introduce peace into that region. Look, the Middle East has been a warring faction for multiple millennia, and no one government or leadership has really been able to crack the nut there. These tribes have been fighting amongst themselves, and there's all the different languages, all the subgenres with Islam, etc., and the various jihads, which somehow some interpretation gives them from Islamic principles that they're kind of, it's endorsed to fight like that. And I'm not sure that interpretation of the Quran is, I think it's the Quran, right?
Yeah.
Is appropriate. I think it's a kind of biased secular sect that is saying it's okay to do jihad and do the damage that they've done in the world. But look, I think at the end of the day, these guys got to get sorted. I think fast forward to recent events this week with Trump in the Middle East, meeting with Saudi Arabia and then going to Syria, hopefully, getting Syria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, get a coalition together, lifting the sanctions in Syria. I think that'll go a long way towards putting pressure and normalizing relations with Iran. I think ultimately Iran needs to be sorted. I don't think you're going to get peace in the Middle East without Iran figuring out who they want to be and if they want to be a contributing member of the global society, which they're not today.
Yeah.
And so I think 9/11 in summary was really too bad and an awful event in American history. I don't think it'll happen again. And if it does, the United States will go in there and take care of business again, as we did.
All right, thank you. September 11th will forever be remembered as one of the worst and most gruesome days of American history, with its impact still reaching today.